Hello, humans. It's me, Ellie Kruk, the host of the Illegal Trans Woman Welcome Pack to the show. Happy Pride to all of you. I could say that for the whole month of June. I am just incredibly thrilled. And I'm welcoming you back to this show where we advocate, without any hesitation, for transgender folks and others who are gender variant. That is what we do. That is what I do. And today's show will be something that I have not done for a while. It's going to be an Ellie's Talking Head show. So that means I don't have a guest. It means I'm going to talk. It's not going to be, it'll be messy because I'll be talking. We won't finish a particular story before we have to take a break. Don't worry. I'm a professional. It'll all work out just all right. Okay. And I'll be covering a number of different issues. Okay. Many that are not very good at all for the trans community. Okay. And you know what? It's about time for a change up because just for this one show, because there is so much coming at this community. Just my community, your community, the community that you're an ally of. Okay. And those who are intolerant with power, okay, we're talking the federal government. Those who are intolerant with power have gotten far more sophisticated. They've become more nuanced in how they're coming after trans folks and non-binary folks and gender variant folks and even intersex folks. They become far more nuanced about it. And we always knew this, but they become far more evil about it as well. So, got a lot here. Let's talk about first item. Okay, there is a new proposed massive federal rule issued by the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB. Now, I briefly talked about this, I think, last week at Golden Valley Pride. I'm really diving into it right now. So the OMB, and you may remember, you may recall, you may know that Russell Vought, V-O-U-G-H-T, is the head of OMB. Russell Vought is also the architect of Project 2025. So he put Project 2025 together with the help of other conservative leaders, but like MAGA conservative leaders, but he is really the face and the voice of Project 2025. They put him in the OMB because he would have a lot of power, because the OMB is all about federal dollars. And this is ringing true right now because there is, as I said, a brand new proposed massive federal rule. It is 400 pages long. It is going after trans people, the trans community, in a way that we have not seen to this date. Okay. All right. Now, some of what I'm going to talk about is from Alexandra Baca. She has a blog titled Transistics. And also, I've been reading about this, but there'll be a little bit in here from Aaron Reed, the great transgender journalist that I've talked about quite a bit. First, some background. The federal government grants hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars every year. All right. They have these things called block grants that go out to states. They have other grants that they make. They do all of this stuff. Okay. And all of those grants have to be renewed yearly by the recipients of the grants. The recipients need to certify, okay, that if they get the money from the federal government, they're going to spend it the way that they have proposed in the grant, the request for a grant, that they're going to spend the money the way that they say they will. And it's about certifying. Now, it is not automatic that you get certified, but at one time I ran a nonprofit. I know something. I'm not an expert on grant writing, but I know something. Okay. you will recall, as I'm doing this right now, okay, you'll recall that Project 2025 targets transgender people. I mean, they mention trans people in the second page of Project 2025, and they mention it multiple times in Project 2025. And you recall that Trump has issued a number of executive orders targeting transgender people. He did that right from the get-go, from the day that he was inaugurated. All of this now is coming to a head because this new proposed rule, titled Regulations for Federal Financial Assistance, states that its purpose is as follows. Quote, to ensure that federal awards and sub-awards are not used to fund, promote, encourage, subsidize, or facilitate diversity, equity, and inclusion, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility policies, principles, or practices, gender ideology, and the so-called transition of a child under 19 years of age from one sex to another. So in other words, this new proposed rule is going after DEI, but it's also specifically going after transgender people. And I'm going to tell you how they're doing that, okay? So first, grants to entities, to states, they cover virtually all kinds of state funding. Funding for state and local governments, fire departments, police departments, library systems, they get federal grants. Colleges and universities get federal grants. Healthcare, hospitals, they get federal funding. They Medicare and Medicaid, they get dollars from Medicare and Medicaid for treatment. Nonprofits, I've talked about libraries, and specifically also schools, K through 12. Thus, any organization or group that receives funding will need to certify several things. First, that the money that they receive from the federal government will not be used for anything related to diversity, equity, inclusion. So say goodbye to all programs or awards that are aimed at righting historical wrongs for marginalized groups, like scholarships for minority students. Those are going to go out the window. Okay. More importantly, for the transgender community, the grant recipient, and then it also talked, if you heard what I said, because it talked about the federal awards and sub awards. So that would mean if one large organization gets federal dollars, and then that organization in turn distributes that money, those are sub awards, that none of those groups, okay, they have to certify that they do not endorse or support, quote, theories or ideology that deny the biological reality of sex or the sex binary in humans, or endorse or advocate for the notion that sex is a chosen or mutable characteristic. That's a quote out of this proposed rule. Okay, just about anything, by the way, that has the letters LGBTQ plus would be covered by this, unless they took the T out of the alphabet, as the Trump administration did at the Stonewall Memorial, at the Stonewall National Memorial in New York City. Court later ordered them to put the T back in, but they removed all this. They changed all the signage, and it was just LGB. That's all they had, okay, for the sign. They took the Q's out as well. And then the court ordered them to put the letters back. All right. But just about anything that's LGBTQ plus related. So that, in theory, means libraries that contain books by authors or about transgender characters. So Ellie Krug's books, right, which are in a number of libraries, trust me, in theory, those books have to be removed. We're talking schools, colleges, universities, public schools can't talk about transgender people in history. Policies that nonprofits or any entity that gets federal dollars can't have any kind of policy around recognizing transgender people transitioning on the job or providing a gender affirming care for adults or children. Trans students in all schools, like we're talking every school, college, university in the country would not be able to use their pronouns or their chosen name that aligns with their gender identity, because if the schools did that, that is affirming trans identities, okay, and the schools would be at risk of losing their funding. Any medical provider in a red or blue state that treats transgender children or adults, or a therapist that does that, where federal dollars are involved in some way for that organization. The federal dollars don't necessarily have to be used for the medical care or for the therapy. As long as the organization gets federal dollars to just do something, the whole organization has to erase transgender people from what its work is. But it's really, really worse than that. Because before an organization can get certified, before they can get the money, they must go through a thing called a pre-issuance review conducted by a political appointee who would be looking to see if the organization supports trans people in any way. And we're going to have to take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about this important issue for more, because it's so incredibly important. You're listening to me, Ellie Krug, on the Illegal Trans Woman, bringing you bad news. Don't worry, there's a little good news, but boy, this is horrible. We'll be back in a sec. And we're back. Ellie Krug with the Illegal Trans Woman. It's a talking head show, as I said. You just have me bringing you bad news for the most part. I have some good news, but bringing you a lot of bad news. But listen, everyone. Listen. You got to know this. You got to be prepared for this. You got to get ready for this. Now, I know we got a lot of trans folks, including yours truly, who struggle with mental health challenges because of all the stuff coming. And I certainly do not want to add to those. On the other hand, you tune in to this show, not only for me to lift you up, but for me to give you real information that you need to know about to be prepared. Okay? Now, we've been talking about this new proposed rulemaking by the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, Russell Vought's entity, his government, his department in the federal government. And before I took the break, I talked about how for the federal funding, there needs to be a thing called pre-issuance review of not only of the grant, but of the organization that is getting the money. And again, if it's a $10 million budget for your organization, say a nonprofit, but you only get $100,000 from the federal government, it doesn't matter. The whole organization has to be free of anything related to transgender people. It is horrific. And it is the federal government using the clout of federal dollars to work to erase my community. And in response, the Human Rights Campaign, which is the nation's largest LGBTQ plus advocacy organization, called this proposed rulemaking, fascism. Here's a statement the HRC issued, part of a statement. Quote, today the Trump administration proposed a rule that would strip government money from any program that acknowledges diversity, abortion, or even the existence of transgender and non-binary people. Withholding public grants from programs that depend on them because you refuse to acknowledge the humanity of certain communities is not good government. It's fascism. HRC and our millions of members, supporters, and allies will fight back. Unquote. It is fascism. It is. If the rule goes forward, okay, I mean, the comment period for this rule. So when rules are issued by the federal government, they come out first as proposed rules, and they allow the public for 60 or 90 days. I think they shortened the comment period for this. Maybe it's only 45 days, but it allows the public to come and weigh in so that there's input. In theory, I'm going to tell you, I don't think that with the Trump administration, I don't think it matters whatsoever what the public thinks about anything that they're doing. They just go and do what they want to do. But the comment period for this rule will be open and through July 13th. You know, I have no doubt that, if the rule goes forward, which would be in October is when it would take effect. If the rule goes forward, I have no doubt that there's going to be legal challenges about it. Okay. And I have, no doubt that it'll get tied up. But with this Supreme Court, I just don't have any great hope about the Supreme Court trying, protecting transgender people. We are, you are hearing this show on the 20th of June. We are waiting for the Supreme Court to rule on the 2 transgender athlete cases. Those are going to come down. They're going to come down next week because the term of the Supreme Court will be up on the 30th of June. So we're either going to get them on Thursday or Friday of the coming week, or we'll get them on Tuesday of the following week. But those decisions are not going to be good. No, those are not going to be good. So this is all kinds of piling on to the community. The other thing to know about this rule as it relates to this federal grant making is that it's a rule. So if it goes into effect, you need to get new rules to undo it. It's not like an executive order that when we have a change of administration, God forbid, I sure hope we do, but that, you revoke all prior executive orders, which Trump did related to Biden, which Biden did related to Trump. No, this is like law. And so you have to go back through, it's a more laborious process. It's more difficult to take apart the fascism once it becomes law. So there's that complicating factor. I'll keep you advised of what goes on with this rule, but you pay attention, please, and I'll do my best to keep you apprised. All right, that's the first depressing item. Here's the second depressing item, okay? And it's a full frontal legal assault against an organization called WPATH. Now, if you're trans or you're non-binary and you're hearing me and you hear the word WPATH, many of you know what WPATH is. It's an acronym that stands for World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It is like the cornerstone of gender affirming care in the United States for both children and for adults. Okay, well, this week, as reported by Chris Geidner in Law Dork, and I've had Chris on my show before, he wrote about the fact that a federal lawsuit has been filed against the organization WPATH, okay? The organization and that provides the kind of standards. So when we talk about standards in the medical field, standards are what doctors and therapists have to follow when they're treating patients. It's, this is, and you as a patient never know about standards, but the doctors know because those standards tell them what they should do, what they should avoid doing, and what's reasonable for them in exercising their judgment. So these standards are, they're the backbone of the medical and therapeutic professions. And for any professional treating transgender people, the standards issued, because there are standards issued by like the Surgeons Association, standards issued by, doctors who, treat your eyes, like Ellie Krug had eye surgery last month. Every medical professional has an organization that issues standards for the trans community, for treating them. That organization is WPATH. Okay, we got that now? All right. And so, and contrary to what MAGA believes, okay, and will assert, it is not the Wild West as it relates to treating trans people. These WPATH standards apply, and I'll tell you a little bit about them in a second, okay? But they establish how to treat patients. So, for example, when I transitioned genders, the standards at that time, they have since changed to a certain degree, but the standards at that time required that before I could take hormones or before I could have surgery, I had to live as female for a year. So I had to fully transition. I had to continue to live as the true me to make sure that it was real. I had to have a therapist. I had to do all of that. And in order for me to start on hormones, I had to have a letter from a therapist. This was mandated by the WPATH standards. And then when I wanted to go have gender confirmation surgery to make an outie into an innie, okay, and breast implants, my doctor or my surgeon at first refused to schedule me for surgery because I had two letters which were required, but the two letters were from master's level therapists. And the WPATH standards required that one of those letters had to be from either an MD or a PhD level therapist. So my surgeon said, I'm not going to operate on you. You got to go back and get an MD or a PhD letter saying that you need this surgery. It cost me $1,000. It cost me time, but I did that. And that was all because of what WPATH required. All right. So you're getting an idea of how important these standards are. Well, this week, the Federal Trade Commission and the Attorney Generals of Alaska, Iowa, Nebraska, and of course, Texas, filed a 123-page complaint seeking an injunction against WPATH to stop WPATH, to stop its standards from being utilized in America by any medical or therapeutic professional. They're claiming that WPATH engaged in fraud. They claimed that it failed to disclose, for example, the side effects of various gender-affirming care treatment. Claimed that it was deceptive about the efficacy. In other words, the need for and the usefulness of gender-affirming care. It claims that the standards that WPATH uses are not grounded in science. And incredibly, because WPATH's a nonprofit, it's a voluntary organization, okay? But claiming that WPATH was making money, off of its standards, which just, it's really, really kind of ridiculous, okay? Now, this is, again, another kind, I was talking before about proposed regulations. This, again, is another kind of full-fledged assault against the transgender community, because here's what this is about. If it can be brought into doubt, that the WPATH standards are what are to be followed. If it can be brought into doubt that the WPATH standards are in some way not proper for a medical or therapeutic professional to follow, it will mean the end of gender affirming care in America. It will the end of trans kids and youth and adults being able to get hormones, for trans kids and youth being able to get puberty blockers, the end for transgender people to undergo gender confirmation surgery or facial feminizing. I'm not saying it right. You get it. Surgery. Okay. Something I also did. And it's going to be the end of our ability to have doctors or therapists in our lives to be able to treat us, because they won't have the standards. The federal government will declare that those standards are improper. And no doctor or therapist is going to go forward without having some standards in the background governing, so they can say, I am being reasonable. I'm following the standards with this treatment. They just will stop the treatment because they don't want to get sued, nor do they want to get blacklisted by the federal government. I have no doubt that part of what this would be is that if you continue to treat trans people, children, youth, and adults, that they'll go after the licenses of the medical professionals. If this goes forward, if this lawsuit works, it will shut down the treatment of the treatment of transgender people across the United States. Now, of course, they filed the lawsuit in Texas, in the Northern District of Texas. Mark Pittman is the federal judge assigned to the case. He was a Trump appointee in 2019. Maybe he is not as MAGA as we might worry about, with judges being appointed in the second term of Trump. They're all, saying that, January, that the January 6th was just kind of a walk in the park. There wasn't a riot. It may be that, and he may not be as bad as Matthew Kaczmarczyk, the other federal judge who is totally MAGA on everything. The case is based on incredible false assumptions and claims. It is. But it's being bought by evil people, hell-bent on going after the trans community. I'll keep you posted about this case as well. Okay, now you're all like wondering, why did I tune into the show today? Why am I listening to Ellie Krug? I like Ellie Krug, but why is she depressing me so much? Hold on. Okay, I do have some good news for you. All right. I'm going to shift gears and give you some good news. Good news number one. Recall my prior reporting about Idaho's new anti-transgender bathroom bill. You remember I've talked about this multiple times. It's HB 752. It was signed. They didn't even wait till July to sign the law in. And as soon as the bill was passed, the governor signed the bill, and it criminalized using any restroom, public restroom in Idaho. If you used if Ellie Krug used the women's restroom in Idaho, that it would make me a criminal because I supposedly, under this law, use the men's restroom. And if you know what I look like, I don't look like a dude. That's for sure. First offense was a year in prison. First offense was like a serious misdemeanor, 1 year in prison. The second offense, felony. Okay, so if I did it twice, a felony and 5 years in prison. Well, this week, a federal judge issued a preliminary injunction barring the application of HB 752. Case was brought by the ACLU of Idaho, Lambda Legal, and some other groups. Case was filed in April. They had a hearing on June 5th, and thank God the judge didn't take forever because he issued his order on June 16th. Now, the wrinkle, so all of that's good news. There's a wrinkle with the order, which essentially says if there is a single user restroom available, a trans person is supposed to use the single user restroom. Okay? But then it goes on to say, well, if that single user restroom is occupied, or there isn't a single user restroom on the floor of the building in which you are located, then you can go use multi-use restrooms. So we have that little wrinkle, but boy, are they going to, is there going to be a debate about whether somebody was in the single-use restroom before you went into the multi-stall restroom? At any rate, okay, so there's a wrinkle about that, but the relative good news on this is that the law has been enjoined. Action of the law has been enjoined, okay? So, and the judge also certified a class of all transgender people in Idaho who can participate in challenging this law. I'm going to be paying particularly close attention to it, and if I have time, I'll talk about it in Random Acts, but I'm planning a road trip that will take me through Idaho. Actually, will have me speaking at 2 churches in Idaho. Before this case came down, I still planned to use the restroom that aligns with my gender identity, but maybe this is going to give Ellie a little bit extra protection. So again, I'll follow that, let you know what happens. Second good piece of good news, okay? More evil from the Trump administration going after, mainly female trans prisoners who are in the federal prison system. I've talked about this before. I mean, once Trump was sworn in, executive orders about, there's only two genders, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the Bureau of Prisons took that and ran and then decided that they would start transferring female trans prisoners who were in women's prisons. Okay. When Trump was president, first time, that was going on. When Biden was president, that was going on. Okay. Bureau of Prisons under Biden was making sure that trans women could go be in women's prisons. And in the course of being in those prisons, because the Eighth Amendment protects transgender people when they're in prisons, you have trans women who are getting surgery, who are taking hormones, who are getting facial feminization. There, Ellie, you got it right this time. Who look like women because that's their gender identity. Ellie Krug looks like a woman. Yeah, forget about the voice. I look like a woman because that's my gender identity. So you have all of these trans women in women's prisons, not creating harm, not risking women. They're just there serving their sentences, but doing it in accordance with the Eighth Amendment, and which is against cruel and unusual punishment, and in accordance with good practice, okay, medical standards, all that stuff. The evil people in the Trump administration want those women, those trans women who look like women, who have all the functioning parts of women. They want to transfer them to men's prisons. They want to do that. And this week, there's been a judge in D.C. Federal Court, Judge Royce Lamberth, Royce Lamberth, who has taken upon himself to educate himself about trans people, to take evidence about trans people. And before him, he has 14 trans women who are suing the Department of, the Bureau of Prisons, the Trump administration, to keep them in women's prisons. And the Judge Lamberth, has remarkably taken evidence as to each one of those women, to learn their stories, to understand about gender dysphoria. That's the, incongruence, the disparity between your mind and your body, and how it gives you horrible, horrible mental health issue challenges because you're not whole. The body's not, it's not all working. Okay. And so learning about that, learning about hormones, learning about all kinds of things. And God love this man. Okay. He issued an injunction blocking the transfer of those 14 female prisoners, blocking them from moving from women's prisons to men's federal prisons. His rationale was that putting those women in a men's prison would threaten their safety. It would threaten, make them targets in those men's prisons because of their feminine features. But it would also exacerbate, it's incredible that he would say this, but exacerbate their gender dysphoria and their risk of self-harm. For a judge to understand that about trans people, about the community, I mean, that's, I bet this guy had no understanding of trans people before this case came to him. Certainly, if he had any understanding, it was small. Okay, now that's the good news. So those 14 women get to stay in female women's prisons in the federal prison system. The bad news is it only applies to those 14. Okay, there are other transgender women in other federal prisons in the country. This order does not apply to them, and I don't know what's happening with them. I really don't. I don't know. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk with you a little bit about compassion and kindness, and I got a couple of other things to report. And then random acts, and we'll just be done. You're listening to me, Ellie Krug, on The Illegal Trans Woman. If you like what you hear, visit my website at elliekrug.com. Email me at lejkrug@gmail.com. I was out at Golden Valley Pride last week, walking on the sidewalk. I was speaking to somebody, a couple feet away, and a woman came past and said, "Are you Ellie Krug? I listen to your show all the time." What do you know? All right, back in a sec. Ellie Krug with the Illegal Trans Woman on AM 950 in the Twin Cities and WCPT 820 AM in Chicago, which I just love that I've got listeners in Chicago now. Thank you so very much for having me. Okay, I want to just talk about compassion and kindness now. There's more news I could report. I've got a whole piece, but I'm going to probably save it until the next show. This week was the opening of the Obama library, presidential library. I couldn't watch it on TV, but I could hear a lot of it. I was driving in the car. It was just wonderful. Wasn't it just something to feel good about a president? Wasn't it just something to remember what a normal presidency was like? And there was a point where President Obama spoke, and he said something that caused me to fist bump the air, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said that he really believed that almost everyone, is good. And almost every, person wants to be good. And then he said, but it's because when they're afraid, when there's fear, we don't see the best in people. Well, I fist bumped the air when I heard that, because I'm like, hey, I've been saying that for more than a decade about people. I'm going to tell you right now, 98% of all humans are good. They are. But it's when we are afraid, it causes us to say and do things that are horrible. They do. And the reason I'm talking about this right now is that because I want this show not only to be a show where we advocate for trans people, gender variant humans, but I also want this show to be a platform where we can talk about bridging the divide, where we can talk about bringing people along who may not, be willing, who are afraid of trans people. I did a talk this week titled "Understanding Trans People - It's Not a Choice." It was to a group of about 130, close to 130 people. I did a poll at the beginning of that talk before I really said anything. I did a poll, put it up on the screen. Everybody had note cards, and I put the question was, do you believe being transgender is a choice? Question: yes, no, or uncertain. Yes, you believe it's a choice. No, it's not a choice. You're uncertain about it. We took that poll, all right, and then I started doing the presentation about trying to show everybody that it's not a choice. And when we did the poll initially, there were only two that said yes, it was a choice. There were 18 that said they were uncertain about it, and then 97 or 98 said no, it's not a choice. It was a great group. I did the presentation, and then I did gray area thinking. They wanted me to do two talks. We got done with gray area thinking, so they'd had me for 3 hours at this point. I did the poll again. Same question: do you believe being trans is a choice? Yes, no, or uncertain. Well, we cut down the yeses from 2 to 1. We cut down the uncertains from 18 to 1, and then all the rest, 117 or whatever it was. Yeah, they said, no, it's not a choice. And this choice thing is important, because if you believe it's a choice to be transgender, then you believe, well, you can choose not to do that. What I did in those 3 hours was that I normalized trans people. That's what I did. I want this show not only to advocate, but to also normalize. So, and I've got to take a break, and then I'm going to come back. I'm going to give you some random acts, and then this talking head show, which I think has been sailing along. Hopefully you've been enjoying it. Then it'll be over. Okay, you're listening to me, Ellie Krug, on the Illegal Trans Woman. Be back in a second. And we're back. Krug with the Illegal Trans Woman, Random Acts. Random Act number one, you may have noticed that there's different bumper music. That's what we call it. Music when we begin our segments and end our segments. No more Radio Gaga by Queen. And the reason for that is that we have a license for that music, but AI does not understand that. And so it makes placement of our podcasts incredibly difficult because AI is kicking out the podcasts when we have music that they believe that somehow we've pirated. So we've come up with our own different kind of electronic music. Hopefully you like it. Random Act. You know, I'm on the school board of my local school district. I've been on the board nearly 4 years now. It has been, trust me, a learning curve. There's a whole lot that I did not understand about school boards, about school financing, about how curriculums work and all that stuff. I know more now. I'm no way an expert, but I know more. And a lot of that along the way has been moments where I've had to support our teachers, our educators, our administrators, or our students, where I've been able, I've had to speak up and do that. There have been some kerfuffles, okay? One about transparency in our meetings, and we've got a school board meeting coming up where we're going to deal with that issue, courtesy of Ellie Krug. But and at times it has been difficult to be on the school board. I mean, it's long hours. Sometimes the meetings go, they start at 6:30, they go till 11:30, or midnight. But certainly they're regularly going till 10 o'clock, 10:15, and for somebody goes to bed at maybe 8:45, sometimes that's an issue. We have 2 traditional high schools in my school district, right? Great high schools, well regarded, academically, sports-wise, but we also have an alternative high school, and that high school has maybe only 70 students. The other high schools have over, 1,000 students. But the alternative high school has maybe 70 students. And in the alternative high school are students who have difficulty, who can't thrive in traditional high school settings. And in our alternative high school, we have this incredible principal. She has assembled an incredible team of some of the most big-hearted. You're going to hear a little emotion in my voice because I love all the schools, but this school just really touches me because I think I could have been a student at the alternative high school. And, I've been able to go to the alternative high schools graduations. Last year I spoke at it. This year, my nonprofit Human Ripple Works awarded a student scholarship, and I was able to help hand that out. But sometimes it's difficult to remember why I'm on school board. Well, this week I was at a supermarket, local supermarket, and I was, by doing something at the service counter, and it was a young woman. I was joking around with her a little bit, and we got done, and I said, hey, thanks, and she said, you're Ellie Krug, aren't you? And I said, yeah. She said, well, gave me her name and said that she had graduated from our alternative high school last year, where I spoke, and that she was now attending college. And so it was a summer job for her. And I'm like, I gave her a fist bump, and I'm like, hey, I'm like thrilled for you. And then I said, thanks again. And then she said to me, thank you, Ellie. It just rocked me. It reminded me why I go through all the crap with school board. All right, we got to go. A big thanks to my producer, Brett, who always does great work. He's been doing a little stuff behind the scenes, working with our music. To you, my listeners, a big thanks. Please tell others about this show. Thank you for listening. I'm just so incredibly grateful. Reach out. I love hearing from you. LEJKrug@gmail.com. Next week, we will be live at Pride, at Twin Cities Pride. So stay tuned. Take care. Go out and do something good for someone else and yourself. Over and out.